June 1957, in the quiet farming town of Millers Creek, Texas, population barely 2,000. Everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. It was a kind of place where front porches still face a street, where folks waved at each passing truck, and where gossip traveled faster than the wind rolling off the wheat fields. So when a young woman named Clara Reeves vanished one June night in 1957, it didn't just stir the town, it split wide open. But what no one in Millers Creek could have imagined back then was that the truth about Clara's disappearance would stay buried for 68 years, until routine construction dig behind an old church unearthed something that forced the town to relive its darkest chapter. And when the arrest finally came in 2025, it wasn't some drifter nor an outsider. It was someone who'd been there all along. Someone who'd smiled in church pews, shook hands at county fairs, and even served coffee to the investigating sheriff back in '57. That's where our story begins, with a town that thought had moved on, only to learn that evil doesn't always leave. Sometimes it just grows old with you. If you enjoy stories where justice finally catches up with the past, make sure to hit the subscribe button, like, and share this video. Also tell us where you are watching from on the comment section. Let's go back to the summer of 1957, when everything still seemed normal in Millers Creek. Millers Creek sat about 80 miles south of Dallas, tucked between sprawling ranches and red dirt backroads that twisted through oak groves and open sky. In 1957, it wasn't even on most maps. One grocery store, one diner, one schoolhouse, and one sheriff. That was about it. The oil boom had passed the town by. What kept folks here was land and family. Generations worked the same fields their grandparents had. On Saturday nights, families gathered at the square for local dances or drive-in movies. The men wore pressed jeans and cowboy hats. The women, floral dresses and pearl earrings. Among them was Clara May Reeves, just 22 years old, the kind of young woman people in town called a sweetheart. She worked part-time at the Millers Creek Diner and helped her father run errands on their small farm off Highway 19. She wasn't the kind of girl who caused trouble, always polite, always smiling. But beneath that soft-spoken demeanor, Clara carried big dreams, dreams that didn't fit neatly inside a small Texas town. She'd talk about saving enough money to move to Austin, maybe even Dallas, where she could work in a department store or study nursing. Her friend said she'd been talking more and more about leaving lately, ever since her engagement ended with Tommy Blake, a local mechanic known for his temper and his drinking. And that's where the whispers began. Tommy and Clara had been together for nearly 2 years. To anyone on the outside, they looked perfect, him, the rugged hometown boy, her, the gentle beauty. But people close to them noticed things. The way Tommy's jaw clenched when Clara spoke to other men, the bruises she sometimes brushed off as clumsy accidents, and the way she'd flinch whenever he raised his voice. Still, in 1950s Texas, girls were told to keep quiet, to make things work, to forgive and forget. Clara did her best to do just that. But one night at the diner, after a particularly loud argument in the parking lot, she told her coworker, Betty Carter, that she was done for good. Betty remembered her saying, "I ain't gonna let him tell me how to live no more. I'm leaving soon, just you wait." 2 days later, Clara was gone. June 14th, 1957, a humid Friday evening. The air was heavy with the scent of wild sage and gasoline. A local dance was happening at the community hall, just outside town, the kind of event where half the county showed up. Clara had planned to go with Betty and a few friends. She even bought a new dress for it, pale yellow, with little white buttons down the front. But she never showed up. Her father, James Reeves, said she was last seen around 7:30 p.m., heading out in her old turquoise Chevy pickup. She told him she was meeting someone for a talk. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. By midnight, her truck was found abandoned off a dirt road near the old cotton mill. Keys still in the ignition, driver's door wide open. Her purse sat on the seat, and one of her shoes lay in the mud a few feet away. The sheriff at the time, Earl Henderson, led the search himself. Men combed the fields, dogs traced the roadways, and volunteers dragged the creek for days. But they found nothing. No blood, no body, no Clara. And just like that, she became one of the first real mysteries Millers Creek had ever known. Naturally, the first person everyone looked at was Tommy Blake. He claimed he hadn't seen her that night, said he'd been working late at his garage. But folks in town didn't buy it. A farmhand told deputies he saw Tommy's truck heading toward the old cotton mill that same evening. Another said he'd overheard Tommy yelling Clara's name outside the dine of the day before she vanished. Still, there wasn't enough to hold him. This was 1957. No DNA, no security cameras, just word of mouth and gut feeling. So when Tommy passed a lie detector test, the sheriff let him go. But not everyone was convinced. Some swore they saw him burn something behind his father's barn that week. Others said his hands were covered in scratches. And a few, mostly the older men at the barbershop, whispered that the sheriff himself had been too soft on Tommy, since Tommy's father had donated money to his re-election campaign. In Miller's Creek, secrets didn't stay secret for long. But truth? Truth could hide for a lifetime. James Reeves never recovered. He spent every spare hour driving those dusty back roads, hoping to spot something the sheriff's men had missed. He even posted flyers in nearby towns, hand-drawn sketches of Clara's face, since there were so few good photographs. Neighbors recalled seeing him out by the cotton fields long after midnight, flashlight in hand, calling her name. His wife, Martha, stopped leaving the house altogether. Some said she blamed herself, that she'd pushed Clara to settle down instead of encouraging her to chase her dreams. By Christmas that year, the Reeves family had stopped coming to church. And by the next summer, the case had gone cold. In small towns, tragedy doesn't disappear. It just becomes something people talk about in hushed tones, with glances over their shoulders. Miller's Creek was no different. The old cotton mill road became a place parents told their kids not to wander. The diner where Clara used to work changed owners twice. And Tommy Blake, he stayed right there in town. He married a woman from a nearby county, had 2 kids, and opened a larger auto shop. People said he'd cleaned up his act, stopped drinking so much. But those who'd known him back then, the older generation, never looked at him quite the same way again. One old farmer told a reporter years later, he used to smile at folks like he was trying too hard, like he wanted you to forget something he hadn't. And for nearly 7 decades, that's how it stayed. Until the spring of 2025, when a construction crew digging behind the First Baptist Church found a rusted metal drum buried 6 feet underground. Inside was a faded scrap of yellow fabric, the kind used on dresses in the 1950s, and a lock of dark brown hair sealed inside a mason jar. The discovery reignited the town's most haunting mystery. And when forensic tests came back, there was no doubt it was Clara Reeves. If you've been following cold cases like this, you know how incredible it is when a case gets reopened after so long. But this one didn't just reopen wounds. It exposed how deep they'd run in a town that thought it had moved on. Because when investigators traced a metal drum back to where it was purchased, they found it came from an old order placed by the Millers Creek Auto Repair Shop, back when Tommy Blake owned it. And that's when everything began to unravel. Before we dive into how this discovery led to an arrest that shook Miller's Creek to its core, make sure you're subscribed. This story only gets darker from here. The morning after Clara Reeves vanished, the sun rose over Miller's Creek like it always did. Warm, steady, and deceptively peaceful. The kind of morning that should have meant chores, breakfast biscuits, and another quiet day in small-town Texas. But for the Reeves family, it was the morning their world stopped turning. At 6:15 a.m., a farmhand named Ray Duncan was the first to find Clara's truck. He'd been driving his tractor toward the cotton fields when he saw something off the dirt road, a turquoise pickup half hidden by tall grass, door hanging open. He climbed down, thinking maybe someone had run out of gas. But when he got close, he noticed the driver's seat was empty, the keys still dangling from the ignition, and a woman's shoe lying face down in the mud beside the truck. He looked around. Fields on one side, the old cotton mill ruins on the other. Silent, not a soul in sight. He called for her, Miss Clara? Nothing. Within an hour, Sheriff Earl Henderson was on scene, a big man with a thick mustache and a drawl that made even bad news sound polite. He took one long look at the truck and muttered, "This ain't right." The ground showed tire marks, 2 different sets. One matched Clara's truck. The other looked newer, deeper, from something heavier. The prints led toward the cotton mill road and disappeared into the brush. The sheriff crouched, squinting at the dirt, and rubbed the sole of that lost shoe between his fingers. "She didn't walk away from here," he said quietly. He was right. By noon, half the town had joined the search. Farmers, churchgoers, even schoolboys with lanterns combed through fields and ravines. They called her name for hours. Clara? Clara May. But all they got back was the echo of their own voices. Sheriff Henderson sent deputies to check every back road within 10 miles. Bloodhounds from Dallas were brought in by sundown. The dogs picked up a faint scent from the driver's seat, but lost it less than half a mile down the mill road. By midnight, people were whispering what nobody wanted to say out loud. "She's gone." The next morning, reporters from nearby counties showed up, rare for such a small place. Flashbulbs popped as Henderson stood on the courthouse steps, trying to sound confident. "We are treating this as a missing person case at this time," he said. "We have no evidence of foul play." But inside, he wasn't so sure. He'd been sheriff for 12 years, and he knew when something smelled wrong. There was no sign of robbery, no sign Clara ran away. She left behind her purse, money, everything. And then there was Tommy Blake. When Henderson called him in for questioning, Tommy showed up wearing grease-stained jeans and that smug, steady grin that made the sheriff's blood simmer. Tommy claimed he'd been working at the shop until 10 p.m., said he went home after and had supper with his folks. His mother confirmed it, though her voice shook as she spoke. When Henderson asked if he'd seen Clara that day, Tommy said no. "Not since Wednesday," he insisted. The sheriff leaned forward. "Anyone who can say different?" Tommy stared back. "Ain't nobody gonna say different, 'cause there ain't nothing to say." It was the kind of answer that sounded rehearsed, too smooth. Still, in 1957, you needed proof. Without witnesses or physical evidence, Tommy was free to go. The sheriff watched him walk out the door and told his deputy, "Keep an eye on that boy." For 3 days, the search centered around the old Miller cotton mill, a crumbling structure from the 1920s that locals said was haunted. The dogs circled there more than once, barking at a section of tall grass near the creek. But when deputies dug through it, they found nothing but an old Coca-Cola bottle and a torn piece of fabric that might have been part of a woman's dress, though there was no way to confirm it. The sheriff had the fabric sent to the state lab in Austin, but the results came back inconclusive. No blood, no fingerprints. Frustration was setting in. The community wanted answers. The Reeves family wanted closure, and the sheriff was running out of leads. So he did something desperate. He called in Texas Rangers. Ranger Caleb Donnelly was a tall, wiry man with silver hair and a quiet intensity that made people either talk too much or not at all. He arrived in Miller's Creek in a beige Stetson and a brown duster, carrying a notebook and a cigarette he never lit. He met the sheriff at the mill site and listened as Henderson recounted the case. Then he walked the ground himself, slow, deliberate, eyes tracing every track in the dirt. After about 10 minutes, Donnelly turned and said, "You're looking too close, Sheriff. Sometimes the truth ain't right underfoot. It's who's standing nearby." It was his way of saying, "Look at the people, not the dirt." That week, the sheriff's office became a revolving door. They questioned Clara's co-workers. None saw her after leaving the diner Thursday evening. They questioned neighbors. Nobody heard anything that night. But when they talked to a teenager named Eddie Wallace, things got interesting. Eddie lived 2 houses down from Tommy's parents. He told the sheriff he'd seen Tommy's truck leaving home real late that Friday night, around midnight. "You sure it was his?" Henderson asked. "Positive," Eddie said. "Ain't no mistaking that loud exhaust. It rattles like an old coffee can." That statement should have been a breakthrough. But when the sheriff followed up, Tommy's father, a respected church deacon, showed up with a lawyer from Dallas, warning the department to stop harassing his boy. This was small-town Texas in the 1950s. Power and reputation meant everything. The sheriff suddenly found himself cornered. Rumors began to spread faster than the investigation. Some said Clara ran off to Dallas with another man. Others said she'd been kidnapped by strangers. But the whispers about Tommy never stopped. At the diner, old men would lower their voices whenever he walked in. Teenagers dared each other to sneak near his garage at night, and his wife, the woman he married just a year later, was said to have left him once, claiming he talked in his sleep about a girl named Clara. Still, no one had proof. By August, the sheriff had exhausted every lead. The Rangers went home. The case file went into a drawer marked unsolved. And Miller's Creek went quiet again, or so it seemed. Martha Reeves refused to give up. She'd sit on the porch at night, clutching Clara's yellow dress, the one she'd never worn to that dance, and stare down the road, hoping to see headlights that never came. Once a month, she'd walk into the sheriff's office with a pie and ask, "Anything new, Earl?" Every time, he'd lower his head and say, "Not yet, ma'am." Those conversations became their own ritual, two broken people clinging to hope in different ways. Years passed, and while the town moved on, Martha didn't. She wrote letters to newspapers, to the governor, even to the FBI. Most went unanswered. Her last letter, written in 1973, ended with, "If I don't live to see justice, I pray my daughter's name won't be forgotten." She died a year later. Unknown to anyone then, less than half a mile from the Reeves farmhouse, behind the First Baptist Church, something sinister lay buried. Tommy Blake, according to what would later come out, had spent the early hours of June 15th, 1957, digging a hole with a borrowed shovel. He'd sealed something in a metal oil drum, packed it tight with dirt, and covered it with stones. Then, as the church expanded years later, concrete was poured right over it. The secret stayed sealed for nearly 7 decades. By the time Sheriff Henderson retired in 1974, he'd reopened Clara's case 3 times, each time hoping new technology or testimony would help. But nothing ever did. He kept the file on his desk till the day he died. Inside it, tucked between yellowed reports and faded photos, was a note written in shaky handwriting. "If I'm wrong about Tommy Blake, may God forgive me. But if I'm right, may he not." Fast forward to 2025. Miller's Creek had changed. New roads, new faces, but the same slow rhythm. Most folks who remembered Clara were long gone. The diner was now a convenience store. The Cotton Mill Road had been paved and renamed Reeves Drive in quiet tribute. When construction workers started digging behind the old church to expand a parking lot, nobody thought much of it, just progress, until one worker's shovel hit something metallic. When they pried it open, the smell hit first, old earth and rust. Inside were fragments of cloth, bone, and that sealed mason jar. Police were called. The area was cordoned off. Within 24 hours, forensic teams arrived. It didn't take long before someone said the name out loud. The name everyone in Miller's Creek had grown up hearing in stories and whispers: Clara Reeves. If you're still following this case, take a second to think about how wild this is. 68 years after her disappearance, a single construction accident blew open a mystery that haunted a whole generation. And the most chilling part? The man responsible was still alive, still living in Texas, and still pretending he'd done nothing wrong. But his time was about to run out. Make sure you stay subscribed, because in the next session, we're diving into how investigators connected that buried drum to a name the town had long stopped saying out loud, and how a single fingerprint from 1957 finally told the truth Miller's Creek never wanted to face. When news broke that human remains had been found behind the First Baptist Church of Miller's Creek, the story spread faster than wildfire across Texas. By sundown, local stations from Dallas, Austin, even as far as Houston were running it. Possible link to 1957 missing person case. For the first time in decades, the name Clara Reeves was back on people's lips, and this time, it wasn't a ghost story told at barbershops. It was a crime scene. Investigators taped off the area, bright yellow lines cutting across what had once been the church's rose garden. Underneath, a rusted metal drum lay half unearthed, sealed with bolts so corroded they had to be sawed off. When the lid came loose, silence fell. Inside were fragments of bone wrapped in disintegrated fabric, yellow, with faint traces of white stitching. The same pattern that matched the description of Clara's dress from that night. A mason jar, sealed with wax, contained what looked like a lock of dark hair and a tiny folded note so water damage it was unreadable. Forensics would later recover only 2 words from it. Forgive me. The find was chilling, but what struck investigators most was the precision of how it had been buried. Whoever did this didn't just dump a body. They wanted it hidden forever. And for almost 70 years, it worked. The Texas Department of Public Safety quickly assigned the case to its cold case and unresolved crimes division. Leading the team was Detective Laura Morales, a sharp, no-nonsense investigator who had built a reputation for closing forgotten cases with a mix of science and instinct. She wasn't from Miller's Creek, and maybe that was her advantage. She didn't carry the town's bias, its memories, or its loyalties. When she arrived, the first thing she said was, "We're not chasing a ghost story. We're chasing a killer." The first challenge was identifying the remains. After 70 years underground, decomposition was extreme. But forensic anthropology had advanced light years since the 1950s. The team extracted mitochondrial DNA from bone fragments, fragile but usable. They compared it against a genealogy database, searching for relatives who might have uploaded their genetic data. It took 6 weeks, but the results came back conclusive. The bones were 99.97% match to the Reeves family line. It was Clara May Reeves. Her name, written in black marker on a lab report, hit the team like a punch to the chest. Even after decades, science had spoken louder than silence, and it wasn't done speaking yet. Detective Morales began combing through the original 1957 case file, which had been digitized years earlier by a volunteer archivist. The file was dusty history, type reports, faded photographs, and one old plastic evidence bag labeled "Recovered from Truck." Inside was a hair comb, a broken lipstick, and a small piece of metal with partial fingerprints. Back then, the sheriff's office had recorded the prints manually, but the technology to analyze them properly didn't exist. The prints were too smudged for 1950s methods. Morales ordered a new digital scan and sent it to the AFIS, Automated Fingerprint Identification System, for enhanced analysis. What came back stunned everyone. A partial match appeared. Not a full fingerprint, but close enough to warrant attention. It matched a living individual, someone still residing in Texas. Thomas E. Blake. When Morales first saw the name, she didn't understand its weight. To her, it was just a suspect on paper. But when she told locals, their faces said everything. Tommy Blake, the mechanic, the ex-boyfriend. The man who'd lived in that same town his entire life, now in his 90s, still attending the same church that had unknowingly hidden the secret of his crime. He was still alive, still smiling in church pews, still shaking hands with people who'd once searched for the girl he buried. Detective Morales didn't want to spook him. She approached carefully, posing as a historian doing interviews about the town's past. When she met Tommy at a small ranch house outside Tyler, Texas, he was a frail old man, white hair, trembling hands, oxygen tank beside his recliner. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, and full of something she recognized instantly: control. He welcomed her in, eager to talk about the good old days. She asked about Miller's Creek, about the diner, about Clara. When she said the name Clara Reeves, he hesitated, just for a second, then smiled and said, "Pretty girl. Shame what happened to her." "What do you think to happen?" she asked softly. "Lord only knows," he said. "She probably ran off. Girls get ideas." It was the same line he'd used 70 years earlier. But this time, Morales wasn't a small-town sheriff tied by politics. She was backed by forensic proof, and she had no reason to play nice. Before she left, she looked around his living room, shelves filled with photographs, church awards, and a Bible that looked older than he was. And behind one of those frames, she noticed something odd, a photo of a turquoise pickup truck. The same model Clara had driven. When she asked about it, Tommy said, "Oh, that old thing? I fixed it up for her once. Pretty paint, that turquoise. Never forgot it." He smiled again, but this time his eyes looked far away, like he was seeing something buried deep under dirt and memory. While Morales was questioning Tommy, forensic analysts were working on the metal drum. They cleaned the corroded surface and found faint engravings, serial numbers that matched a shipment order from 1957. placed by a business called Blake and Sons Auto Service. It wasn't coincidence. It was evidence. That same order had been signed by none other than Thomas Blake. They also found something else. A tiny fingerprint preserved on the inner rim of the drum lid. It had been protected from decay by rust and sediment. The lab extracted a partial print. A miracle given the age. When they ran it through the database, it confirmed what the sheriff's gut had known all those years ago. It belonged to Tommy Blake. In June 2025, deputies arrived quietly at Blake's home. No sirens, no spectacle, just 2 cars, 1 warrant, and 70 years of unfinished business. Tommy answered the door in his slippers, his voice quivering. "Can I help you, officers?" Detective Morales stepped forward. "Mr. Blake, you're under arrest for the murder of Clara May Reeves." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed, a soft, broken sound. "That was a long time ago," he whispered. "Yes," Morales said. "But she never got to grow old." "You did." The arrest sent Miller's Creek into chaos. People who'd grown up calling Tommy Mr. Blake couldn't believe it. He'd been a deacon, a volunteer, even helped raise money for the very church that had hidden his victim. Old-timers shook their heads. "I knew it," one man said. "Knew it all along. But who was going to say it out loud back then?" Others refused to believe it at all. Tommy? That old man? No way. He was a good Christian. But in small towns, appearances had always been armor, and Tommy had worn his perfectly. During questioning, Tommy at first denied everything. But when confronted with the forensic evidence, the fingerprint, the serial number, the DNA confirmation, something in him cracked. He asked for water, then said softly, "You ever do something you can't undo?" Morales didn't answer. She just waited. Tommy looked down at his trembling hands and began to talk. He told her about that night in June 1957, how Clara had come to meet him near the cotton mill to tell him she was leaving town. He begged her not to. When she refused, he said, she laughed. Just laughed. Said I'd never change. He claimed he lost control. He grabbed her arm. She fell, hit her head. He panicked, drove her truck to the mill road, tried to wake her, but she didn't move. He said he buried her because he was scared. Scared of losing his life, his reputation, his family's respect. So he stole an oil drum from the shop, sealed her inside, and hid it behind the church, thinking God would protect him from being found. He was wrong. When the news hit national outlets, Miller's Creek became a pilgrimage site for true crime enthusiasts and journalists. Headlines read, "Cold case from 1957 finally solved. Murderer found living in same town." Detective Morales stood before cameras, saying, "Justice doesn't have an expiration date." Clara Reeves was silenced in 1957. Today, her voice has been heard. The sheriff's office later placed flowers at the memorial on Reeves Drive. A plaque was installed by the church garden where she'd been buried, reading, "Here lies the truth that time cannot hide." For many, the hardest part wasn't what Tommy did, but that he'd lived among them for 70 years. He'd baptized their children, fixed their cars, prayed beside them every Sunday. How many times they wondered, had they shaken the hand of killer? And worse, how many had known, deep down, and stayed quiet? Miller's Creek had always prided itself on being a good town, but Clara's case forced it to face an uncomfortable truth. Goodness means nothing when silence becomes complicity. Tommy Blake's trial began in late 2025. Because of his age and health, prosecutors agreed to a plea deal, manslaughter with confession, in exchange for full disclosure and recorded testimony. He received a 20-year sentence to be served in a state medical facility. He died 5 months later. In his cell, investigators found a Bible open to Psalm 51. "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love." And tucked inside it, a faded black and white photograph of Clara, smiling at the diner counter. Today, Clara's story lives on not as tragedy, but as triumph of persistence. A foundation was created in her name, the Reeves Fund for Cold Case Justice, dedicated to helping reopen unsolved disappearances across rural America. Her great-niece, Lydia Reeves, now speaks at conferences about the importance of forensic genealogy. In one interview, she said, "If you ever think your voice doesn't matter, remember, it took one small town, one note in a jar, and one lock of hair to bring a murderer to justice. If you're watching this right now, take a second to think about how far we've come. Back in 1957, justice depended on memory and manpower. Today, it depends on truth that refuses to stay buried. If you believe every cold case deserves to be solved, share this story. Because someone out there, another family, another victim, is still waiting for that call that says, 'We found her.' And when that day comes, maybe it'll be because you helped keep their name alive." The morning after Tommy Blake's arrest, Miller's Creek awoke to a town in shock. It wasn't the typical sleepy Texas dawn. The air felt charged, almost electric, with whispers flowing faster than the wind to the oak trees lining Main Street. People stopped mid-step on sidewalks, staring at one another, eyes wide and mouths tight. For decades, they carried the memory of Clara Reeves like a shadow. Now, the shadow had come alive. Local storekeepers wiped down counters nervously as neighbors huddled in corners. Some refused to believe it, insisting Tommy Blake had been a pillar of the community for decades. Others nodded silently, confirming what their instincts had known all along. The man they shook hands with every Sunday, who fixed their trucks and mentored their kids, was capable of the unthinkable. Lydia Reeves, Clara's great-niece, flew in from Austin after hearing the news. She had grown up hearing whispers, letters, and stories of her great-aunt, but the reality of the arrest, 78 years after Clara's disappearance, was almost surreal. "It's overwhelming," she said softly to the press. Justice took too long, but it came, and for Clara, that's what matters. Her uncle, James Reeves' youngest son, now 78, couldn't stop shaking. He had held on for decades, hoping one day the truth would emerge. "We never forgot her," he said. "We never stopped looking, and we never stopped hoping." But to see him taken away, it's a mix of relief and grief, because nothing brings her back. News helicopters hovered over Miller's Creek for days. Cable channels, podcasts, and YouTube channels dissected the case, replaying decades-old photographs of Clara. Her soft smile, her youthful eyes, the turquoise pickup she loved. Headlines screamed, "Texas cold case solved after 68 years. Ex-boyfriend arrested decades later. Murderer lived among town for 70 years. The town's residents were reluctant interviewees. Some clutched their hats tightly and said nothing. Others, too old to remember clearly, whispered fragments of rumors from 1957. Even a local diner, now a convenience store, became a pilgrimage site. People left flowers, notes, and photographs, honoring Clara's memory and marking the spot where so much of her life had unfolded. The city council convened an emergency meeting at the community hall to discuss safety, the media, and the emotional toll of the case. The room was packed. One long-time resident stood, shaking. "How could we have known? How could anyone know? He was one of us." Another countered. "We knew. Some of us did. We just didn't want to face it, didn't want to believe it." The debate wasn't just about guilt. It was about complicity, memory, and the fragile image of a small town built on trust. And as voices rose, Sheriff Henderson's grandson, a young officer in town, reminded them, "The past is here to teach us, not to shame us. Clara deserves that we listen, that we learn." By late June 2025, the district attorney had assembled a formidable team for the trial. Although Tommy Blake was in his 90s and in declining health, the DA insisted on a thorough presentation, not just for conviction, but for history, for closure, for the town. Detective Laura Morales led the preparation. She organized the evidence. The metal drum, now carefully cataloged and photographed. The DNA results, confirming the remains were Clara's. The fingerprint on the drum, matching Tommy Blake. The original case files, including statements and witness recollections. A timeline reconstruction based on vehicle records, maps, and 1957 interviews. She met daily with forensic experts, historians, and attorneys to ensure every detail, every nuance of the story would be presented clearly and convincingly. "We aren't just proving he killed Clara," Morales told the team. We're proving the town, the system, and time didn't forget her. Justice might be late, but it must be complete. Even with the evidence mounting, many townspeople resisted. At the local church, where Blake had long been a deacon, parishioners debated quietly in pews. He's old. He's sick. Is it really worth pursuing? Worth it? Clara deserved her life, and we owe her that respect. Every day she was gone, this town carried her story. We can't pretend it didn't happen. Neighbors who had once shared barbecue and laughter with Tommy now avoided him. Children were warned never to enter his property. And even the sheriff's office, now staffed with younger generation, prepared for protests, media frenzy, and inevitable court battles. Detective Morales knew some of the breakthrough would come from forgotten witnesses. Betty Carter, Clara's former co-worker, now 86, recalled the day Clara disappeared. Her memory was clear, her voice steady. She confirmed Clara's plans to leave Miller's Creek and warned how upset Tommy had been. Eddie Wallace, the teenager who first reported Tommy's late-night truck drive in 1957, provided testimony corroborating timing and location. 70 years later, his recollections still held weight. Local farmers remembered seeing Tommy near the cotton mill that night, though they had been too afraid to report at the time. The combination of forensic proof and eyewitness statements from the past created a nearly airtight timeline, bridging decades of silence with modern certainty. While the town wrestled with its own feelings, Detective Morales and her team were deeply affected. It's not just a cold case, she told her assistant one night. It's 70 years of grief, silence, and fear. Every decision we make affects generations. Her team pored over decades-old evidence late into the night, reconstructing events minute by minute. Every photograph, scrap of fabric, and report became a voice crying out for justice. One technician quietly said, "You can't imagine the weight it carries, working for someone you never met, whose life ended because the world wasn't watching." The district attorney's office held a press conference weeks before the trial, carefully controlling the narrative. "This is not about revenge," the DA said. "It's about the truth. It's about giving Clara Reeves the justice she deserved for decades. And it's about letting a small town reconcile with its past." Miller's Creek, though small, had suddenly become the center of a national conversation about cold cases, the passage of time, and accountability. Morales, when interviewed, reminded viewers, "This story proves that no crime goes entirely unnoticed. Science, persistence, and courage can bring closure even after decades. If you've got information about unsolved cases, don't stay silent. You could change history." Miller's Creek now faced a new challenge: coexistence with the knowledge of what had been buried. Some residents supported the prosecution fully, volunteering for courthouse duties and providing statements. Others felt torn, conflicted about seeing a neighbor, even an aged one, convicted. At local diners and stores, whispers became debates. Families argued about the responsibility of silence, about moral courage, and about how justice could take decades but still arrive. Detective Morales attended town hall meetings, patiently listening to grief, anger, and disbelief. She reminded them, Clara Reeves is not just a victim. She is a lesson. In this town's story, the truth, as hard as it is, must be told. By the end of this session, the town was awakening to the reality of the trial. The media frenzy had intensified, and Detective Morales was piecing together a decade of evidence into a coherent narrative for court. The stage was set. The arrest had already shaken Miller's Creek. But the trial, where decades-old secrets would be exposed in front of a modern courtroom, was about to turn shock into reckoning. If you've been following Clara's story so far, make sure to like and subscribe, because in the next session, we'll dive into the courtroom drama, the shocking revelations, and the community's confrontation with 70 years of truth. The courthouse in Miller's Creek had never seen anything like it. For decades, it had handled small disputes, property disagreements, the occasional bar fight. But now, in 2025, its wooden doors swung open to history. Cameras, reporters, and curious townsfolk packed every available seat. Outside, people craned their necks through windows and huddled in lawn chairs, eager to witness the trial of Thomas "Tommy" Blake, a man whose life spanned nearly a century and whose sins reached back 78 years. Inside, The air was heavy with anticipation. The scent of polished wood, old paper, and anxiety hung like a fog. Everyone, from lifelong residents to out-of-town journalists, knew this wasn't just a trial. This was Miller's Creek facing itself. The district attorney rose first. Her voice was calm but resolute. Ladies and gentlemen, today you will hear the story of a young woman whose life was stolen, of a town that turned a blind eye, and of a man who tried to hide a crime under decades of silence. Today, we seek justice not just for Clara Reeves, but for every victim whose voice has been silenced. She laid out the evidence: the drum, the fingerprints, the DNA, the timeline, each piece meticulously cataloged, each detail meant to pierce through the veneer of decades. When the defense attorney stood, his tone was more defensive than assertive. Mr. Blake is a frail, elderly man. He lived a life of contribution, helping this town, mentoring its youth, volunteering at the church. Any suggestions otherwise must be weighed carefully. Memories fade. Records are incomplete. We asked the jury to consider context and the passage of time. The room was tense. Some shook their heads at the defense. Some whispered to neighbors. Others gripped their hands together in prayer. Detective Laura Morales took the stand next. She described the discovery of the metal drum, the excavation behind the church, and the painstaking forensic work that followed. She walked the jury through the DNA confirmation that identified the remains as Clara Reeves, emphasizing that science had spoken after nearly 8 decades. She held up photographs of the drum, the bones, and fragments of Clara's yellow dress. The room fell silent. Even seasoned reporters looked away, unable to watch the images without a pang of sorrow. Next, the fingerprint evidence. Morales explained how a partial print on the drum lid, preserved under rust and sediment, matched Tommy Blake's fingerprints in modern databases. Then, the historical witness statements. Eddie Wallace, now in his 80s, gave testimony confirming what he'd seen as a teenager. Tommy driving his truck late on the night Clara disappeared. He spoke slowly but clearly, his memory sharper than expected, the weight of decades in every word. "I saw him," Eddie said. "I told what I saw. I couldn't speak up then, but I can speak now." The jury listened intently. Some cried quietly. Some clenched their fists. The defense tried to focus on Tommy's age and contributions, painting a picture of a man whose decades of service to the town, church, and family somehow mitigated his crimes. "Mr. Blake is not the monster some are portraying him to be," the attorney said. "He was a man of his community, a man of faith, a man who has lived under the weight of time and regret." But when asked about Clara, when asked to explain the drum, the fingerprint, the burial behind the church, Tommy offered nothing. Silence. It was in that silence the jury felt the truth most profoundly. Outside, Miller's Creek watched in anticipation. Local radio stations broadcast snippets. Cafes, stores, and churches became hubs of conversation. Residents debated morality, justice, and the passage of time. Some mourned the revelation. Some celebrated. "I can't believe it," one woman whispered to her friend. "I've known him my whole life. And he did that?" "It was Clara," her friend replied. All those years, she didn't deserve the silence. The town, divided by decades of loyalty and secrecy, now had a record with truth that could no longer be ignored. Perhaps the most shocking testimony came from a former co-worker, Tommy, who revealed that in the days following Clara's disappearance, Tommy had confided, cryptically, about a mistake I can't fix. The jury and spectators were struck by how long the truth had been buried beneath appearances, fear, and societal pressures. Another witness, a historian, testified about small-town dynamics in 1957, how reputation and social standing often shielded wrongdoing, how silence became protection, and how difficult it was to challenge authority in such communities. The combination of scientific evidence, eyewitness accounts, and historical context created a compelling narrative, decades old but meticulously reconstructed. Lydia Reeves was called to the stand. She spoke slowly, tears in her eyes, clutching a photograph of Clara. "I never knew my aunt, not really, but I grew up with her story. Her absence shaped our family. And now, finally we have her truth. This trial isn't just about punishment. It's about remembering her, honoring her, and making sure her name is never forgotten." Her words reverberated through the courtroom, touching even hardened journalists, some of whom dabbed at their eyes. Judge Patricia Langley, overseeing the trial with careful gravity, reminded the jury of their duty. You are here to consider the evidence presented, the facts of this case, and the law. This is not a story of vengeance. It is a story of justice. Decades may have passed, but the law does not forget. The truth, once revealed, must be acknowledged. The prosecution summarized the case with clarity and conviction. We have a man who tried to hide his crime under time, under silence, under fear. But science, witness memory, and relentless pursuit of truth have uncovered what he could not bury. Clara Reeves deserves justice. Her family deserves justice. And the community must confront what has long been ignored. The defense, in their closing, attempted one last plea for leniency due to age and frailty. But in the end, the evidence was undeniable, and the jury was instructed to deliberate based on facts, not sympathy. The jury retired to a small, windowless room, the air tense with the weight of decades-old decisions. For 4 hours, they discussed, argued, and revisited the evidence. Photographs of the drum, bones, and fingerprints were repeatedly examined. Testimonies from witnesses both young and old were weighed. Finally, they reached a verdict. Millers Creek streets were unusually still that morning. News crews lined the sidewalks. Residents filled the courthouse in anticipation. The foreman stood as the clerk read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Thomas E. Blake, guilty of manslaughter and unlawful burial of human remains. Gasps, tears, and whispers swept through the courtroom. Some hugged, some wept quietly, others simply stared, processing the decades of hidden truth now made public. The town faced mixed emotions, relief that justice had been served, even decades late, anger at the decades of silence that allowed a crime to remain hidden, reflection on moral courage, accountability, and the role of community in protecting or ignoring its most vulnerable members. Churches held memorial services. The Reeves family erected a small monument where the drum had been found, honoring Clara's life and resilience. Her story teaches us that truth, no matter how long delayed, is always worth seeking, Detective Morales said during a press conference. Clara's story now resonates far beyond Millers Creek. True crime investigators, historians, and families with missing loved ones study the case as a model of forensic persistence, community accountability, and the power of modern science to uncover decades-old crimes. The Reeves family established a foundation in her name, supporting the reopening of cold cases across Texas and the nation, ensuring no victim's voice is silenced forever. If you've been following this story, remember, justice can be delayed, but it's never denied. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every step toward truth matters. Share this story to honor Clara Reeves, and support those who continue the work of bringing light to the dark corners of history. Her name is remembered, her story has been told, and her life, though cut tragically short, now stands as a beacon for truth, courage, and accountability. The trial was over, the verdict delivered, and yet the echoes of Clara Reeves' story lingered like a stubborn wind through Millers Creek. For many in the town, life felt simultaneously heavier and lighter. Heavier, because the truth they had avoided for decades now demanded acknowledgement. Lighter, because finally, the silence had been broken. The guilty party was identified, and the family had their long-awaited justice. But justice, as Detective Morales often reminded her team, was not a neat conclusion. It was a beginning, a reckoning. The town didn't immediately know what to do with itself. Streets were quieter than usual. Shops opened late, and church bells rang with an almost ceremonial gravity. Residents passed one another in subdued recognition, nodding quietly, each privately grappling with their own memories of the man who had walked among them for 70 years. "It's surreal," said Marjorie Lane, who had been Tommy Blake's neighbor since the 1960s. "I waved to him every day, bought groceries from him, and he did something so terrible. I feel betrayed and relieved, all at once." Even local schools incorporated Clara's story into history discussions. Teachers emphasized the importance of civic courage, forensic science, and ethical accountability. Children, some only learning about her existence for the first time, asked questions adults hadn't dared to voice for decades. How could nobody stop him? Why did it take so long to find her? And parents, too, were forced to confront uncomfortable truths, that appearances could deceive, and that moral vigilance was a responsibility of everyone in the community. Lydia Reeves and her family returned to Austin for a brief respite. But grief, layered with relief, made sleep difficult. It's strange, Lydia said during an interview with a local journalist. We've wanted justice for so long, and now we have it. But we've spent decades imagining her life. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, and all of that was stolen from her. Justice doesn't bring those years back. Her uncle, now in his late 70s, had a quiet moment alone in his home. He opened a dusty photo album, flipping past pictures of Clara at 17, smiling in her summer dresses, hair tucked behind her ears, eyes bright and full of life. He whispered a long-held prayer. We finally know, girl. We finally know what happened to you, and your story will not be forgotten. For Morales, the case carried a profound emotional weight. It was unlike other cold cases she had worked on. The personal connection to the town, the decades of silence, and the meticulous reconstruction of events across nearly 8 decades made it almost surreal. Sitting in her office late one evening, she reflected. We sometimes think that time erases responsibility, that if a crime is old enough, it somehow loses its power. But this case reminded me, justice has no expiration date. Truth does not grow stale. And no matter how many years pass, someone will always bear witness. Her team, exhausted but exhilarated, agreed. The case had stretched them intellectually and emotionally. Every day in the lab, every witness interview, every fingerprint and DNA match brought them closer to Clara. And with every discovery, they felt the presence of a young girl whose life had been stolen, whose story demanded recognition. While some residents mourned, others sought ways to honor Clara's memory publicly. The First Baptist Church, under careful discussion with the Reeves family, dedicated a small garden in her honor. Local artists painted a mural on a brick wall near Main Street depicting Clara's smile, her turquoise pickup, and the open fields of Miller's Creek, a visual testament to her enduring presence. Community meetings began focusing on moral courage, reporting wrongdoing and supporting victims. The town realized that their collective silence had allowed evil to persist for decades, and many saw it as a moral imperative to teach future generations accountability and vigilance. We must ensure that the mistakes of the past don't define the future, said Sheriff Henderson's grandson, now the current sheriff. Clara Reeves' story will guide us, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder of our responsibility to act. Tommy Blake spent his final months in a state medical facility. Despite the frailty of age and failing health, he remained lucid enough to reflect on his actions, though never fully remorseful in words. Investigators noted that he requested to see some of the court transcripts and photographs. It was as though he wanted to witness in detail the unraveling of a carefully constructed life, now exposed in front of the world. In private conversations, Morales noted that Tommy rarely spoke. When he did, it was often cryptic. I thought it would be enough time, silence, to make it go away. But time could not erase the evidence. And despite decades of secrecy, the story had returned to demand recognition. Clara's case quickly became a model for forensic genealogy and cold case investigation. Journalists and podcasters across the country discussed the case in detail. Experts cited the following lessons. Persistence is critical. Even decades-old cases can be solved. Science evolves. DNA analysis, fingerprint databases, and digital reconstruction are powerful tools. Community accountability matters. Societal silence allows crime to endure. News networks highlighted how families and investigators could collaborate to uncover forgotten truths. Clara Reeves became not just a story of tragedy, but a symbol of delayed but inevitable justice. To honor Clara, the Reeves family established the Clara Reeves Foundation, dedicated to supporting families with missing loved ones, funding forensic genealogy research, raising public awareness about cold cases, particularly in rural communities. Lydia Reeves gave a speech at the foundation's inaugural event. Clara's life was stolen, but her story, her name, and her memory have endured. Let this foundation be a testament to all those who have been silenced. Let it remind us that even after decades, justice is possible and no one's story is ever truly lost. The foundation quickly became a hub for investigators, genealogists, and advocates, fostering cross-state collaboration to reopen cases and ensure victims were remembered. Miller's Creek, now forever changed, became a case study in small-town moral reckoning. Townsfolk reflected on their responsibilities. Silence has consequences, even decades later. Accountability is timeless. Crimes do not disappear because they are inconvenient. Community vigilance protects the vulnerable. Neighbors, friends, and families all have a role. Several local schools incorporated Clara's story into curricula on ethics, justice, and history. Students studied how forensic science could solve decades-old crimes and how moral courage could prevent tragedies from being hidden. For Morales, the case was a reminder that investigators are not just solving crimes. They are restoring dignity to lives that have been denied recognition. "I've seen horrors in my career," she said in a reflective interview. But this case was unique, a reminder that the past never truly disappears. It waits for someone to uncover it. And when justice is served, even decades later, it restores faith. The final chapter in Clara's story was more than a trial, more than an arrest. It was a culmination of decades of hope, grief, and relentless pursuit of truth. Miller's Creek would never be the same. Its streets, once quiet and unassuming, now carried the weight of history. Its people, once divided by ignorance or fear, were reminded of the power of community, accountability, and courage. Clara Reeves, a young woman whose life was stolen in 1957, had finally found her voice. And in her memory, justice, education, and moral reflection continued to grow, ensuring that future generations would not repeat the mistakes of the past. If you follow Clara's story, share her story to honor her memory. Support organizations working to reopen cold cases. Remember, silence can protect wrongdoing. Speaking up can save lives. Clara Reeves' story is a testament that no matter how long it takes, truth will surface, justice will be sought, and lives will be remembered. The courtroom doors had closed, the cameras had left, and the reporters had filed their stories. But Miller's Creek remained suspended in a kind of limbo. The arrest of Thomas "Tommy" Blake had exposed not only a decades-old crime, but also the fragility of community memory and the hidden shadows that often lurk behind familiar faces. Some days felt heavier than the trial itself. Shopkeepers noticed fewer smiles in passing. Neighbors no longer waved automatically. And the town's church bells rang with a tone of solemn reflection rather than celebration. People spoke quietly in hushed tones, their conversations peppered with, "I never thought," or "I can't believe." The verdict had been delivered, but the emotional and moral reckoning was just beginning. The Reeves family returned to their hometown with a mix of relief and melancholy. For decades, they had imagined what Clara's life might have been, constructing memories and milestones that were stolen from her. Now, they face reality, a mixture of closure, grief, and unresolved questions. "We have her truth now," Lydia Reeves said at a small family gathering. "But we can't forget the years lost. The silence that allowed this to happen for so long. It's part of her story, too." Her uncle, still holding a photograph of Clara as a teenager, spoke quietly. "It's strange to have justice finally after all these years. But it's bittersweet. Those who loved her never got to say goodbye properly." Other families in town, who had once interacted with Tommy Blake for decades, also grapple with their own sense of complicity. Not legal, perhaps, but moral. "We liked him," one longtime neighbor admitted. "He helped us with our barns, taught our children, and yet we ignored the signs. We didn't question things. Maybe we were afraid. Maybe we didn't want to believe." The town collectively began to understand that morality is active, not passive. Silence and ignorance, they realized, had consequences that could echo across generations. Miller's Creek was still divided in subtle ways. Some residents expressed relief that the truth was finally out and justice was done. Others expressed anger, not at the verdict, but at the decades of inaction, at the fear that had allowed a crime to remain hidden. Churches and community centers became places for discussion and reflection. Forums were held to talk about ethics, accountability, and the responsibilities of small-town life. Some conversations were uncomfortable, but necessary. "We can't change the past," said Sheriff Henderson's grandson, "but we can ensure that the lessons remain. We can make our town safer, more vigilant, more compassionate." And slowly, through shared grief and dialogue, a collective healing began. Just as the town began to settle into this new reality, a discovery added an unexpected twist. During the cleaning of Tommy Blake's old property, a sealed envelope was found in a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard. Inside was a letter addressed to the Reeves family, written in 1957, shortly after Clara disappeared. Its contents were cryptic but chilling. "I can't undo what's done. The mistake cannot be erased. But know that the town sees nothing, and all will remain as it is. Fear will keep everyone quiet. She'll be forgotten, but not me." The letter confirmed suspicions that some form of intimidation had been used to keep witnesses silent. It cast a stark light on a culture of fear that had allowed a crime to remain buried for decades. When Detective Morales shared the letter publicly, the town was shaken once more. It was one thing to confront a crime long past. It was another to read words that reflected deliberate manipulation and deceit written nearly 8 decades ago. The revelation of the letter reignited national media attention. News outlets, podcasts, and YouTube channels revisited the case, now discussing not only the crime itself, but the psychology of secrecy, fear, and long-term manipulation in small communities. Historians and criminal psychologists were invited to discuss the implications. The letter became a symbol, a reminder that even when crimes are hidden, the truth has a way of surfacing, sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes through meticulous investigation, and sometimes through sheer chance. Detective Morales commented on the twist. "This letter doesn't change the verdict, but it does highlight something we often forget, that communities have power both to shield and to reveal, and history, even when silent, waits to be uncovered." For the Reeves family, the discovery of the letter brought a mix of horror and validation. It confirmed that Clara had not simply vanished, but that a deliberate effort had been made to obscure her fate. "It's hard to read, even after all these years," Lydia said, "but it also confirms what we always suspected, that Clara's disappearance was not random. It was calculated. And now we have the full story." The family held a small memorial at the site where Clara's remains had been found. Flowers, photographs, and personal mementos were placed carefully around the site. They prayed, reflected, and acknowledged that while the past could never be fully repaired, they had reclaimed Clara's narrative. Inspired by the case, the Reeves family began planning the establishment of a foundation in Clara's name. The mission: support families with unresolved missing person cases, promote forensic and investigative research into long unsolved crimes, educate communities about the dangers of silence and the importance of vigilance. Even at this early stage, the foundation began collaborating with local law enforcement, historians, and advocacy groups. The story of Clara Reeves became not only a cautionary tale, but also a beacon of hope for justice delayed, but not denied. As the foundation gained recognition, the residents of Millers Creek began to reflect individually on their role in past inaction. Farmers who had seen Tommy Blake near Clara's last known location remembered the unspoken fear that had kept them quiet. Former teachers recalled conversations with students about morality and duty, realizing they had missed opportunities to instill courage. Community leaders recognized the systemic failures. Fear, reputation, and loyalty had been allowed to trump justice. Workshops and town forums were organized, not just to discuss Clara's case, but to teach ethical responsibility, moral courage, and civic duty. For Morales, the case became a defining chapter in her career. She often reflected on the interplay between time, silence, and truth. "This case proves that even decades later, lives can be restored in some way," she said. "Every piece of evidence matters. Every witness counts. And even when the world moves on, the truth persists." Her team, inspired by the case, dedicated themselves to uncovering hidden histories, believing firmly that justice, no matter how delayed, was worth pursuing. By the end of this session, the trial's verdict had long-term effects. The town began collective reflection and healing. The Reeves family found closure while discovering additional evidence, the letter that shed new light on the case. Plans were underway for a foundation in Clara's name, cementing her legacy. Miller's Creek learned hard lessons about accountability, silence, and community vigilance. The story of Clara Reeves, once buried by time and fear, was now becoming a guiding narrative for justice and moral responsibility, one that will continue to unfold in the coming decades. If you've been following this story, make sure to like and subscribe, because in the next session, we'll explore even deeper revelations, unexpected twists, and how Clara Reeves' story is transforming communities beyond Miller's Creek. Just when the dust seemed to settle on Miller's Creek, another unexpected development sent ripples through the town and beyond. It began quietly. A retired postal worker, sorting through decades-old mail in a dusty attic, discovered a bundle of letters addressed to Clara Reeves, postmarked from neighboring counties in 1957. The letters hinted at someone outside the town, knowing more than anyone realized. Each note was unsigned, but they suggested awareness of Clara's plans, fears, and even her suspicions about Tommy Blake's temperament. Detective Morales was brought in immediately. She pored over the letters, cross-referencing handwriting, dates, and content with the original case files. What she found was astonishing. These letters corroborated the theory that Clara had sensed danger long before she disappeared, and that someone, whether afraid or constrained by circumstances, had chosen not to act. The discovery of the letters reignited debates about collective responsibility. Morales noted patterns. Many of the town's residents had chosen silence out of fear, loyalty, or denial. But the letters suggested that even outside Miller's Creek, knowledge of Clara's disappearance had been circulating. Yet no one intervened effectively. "It's a web of silence," Morales explained during a press briefing. "Sometimes people protect themselves or others without realizing they are allowing harm to continue. History shows us that silence is powerful and dangerous." Historians highlighted this as a critical point. Small towns, particularly in mid-20th century America, often maintained reputations over truth, prioritizing social cohesion over moral courage. The Clara Reeves Foundation, initially focused on local cold cases, began receiving inquiries from across Texas and neighboring states. Families whose loved ones had disappeared decades ago sought guidance, assistance, and hope. Workshops were organized, teaching forensic genealogy techniques, how to review old evidence systematically, ways to collaborate with law enforcement effectively. Clara's story is more than tragedy. Lydia Reeves emphasized at the Foundation's first national conference. It's a blueprint. It shows us that even when time has passed, there is a path to justice. And every step we take now can save another family from decades of uncertainty. In another twist, Morales' team received a call from a man in his late 80s, previously unknown to investigators. He had been a teenager in 1957 and a friend of Tommy Blake, though he had long since moved away. He requested to speak to Morales confidentially. In a recorded session, he revealed that Tommy had confided in him about the mistake shortly after Clara vanished, describing the burial but never admitting it publicly. "I was scared," the man confessed. "I didn't know what to do. I thought telling anyone would put me in danger. I carried it for decades. I always regretted not speaking up." The revelation shocked the team. It was further confirmation of the fear-driven silence that had allowed the crime to remain hidden for nearly 8 decades. The story now transcended Miller's Creek. National news outlets, podcasts, and documentaries highlighted the multi-generational implications of the case. Social scientists discussed the psychological burden of long-held secrets. Legal experts highlighted the importance of cold case units and forensic genealogy. Families across the country found inspiration, realizing it was never too late to seek answers. Morales appeared on multiple platforms, emphasizing, the lessons here are universal. Justice delayed does not have to be justice denied, and every community has a role in ensuring truth prevails. Miller's Creek continued its slow journey toward healing. The Reeves family collaborated with schools, the church, and civic groups to establish annual memorials for Clara Reeves, scholarships in her name for students pursuing criminal justice and forensic science, town-wide ethics workshops to teach responsibility, vigilance, and moral courage. The town had transformed, no longer merely a place of memory, but a living testament to resilience, accountability, and hope. "We cannot undo what happened," said Sheriff Henderson's grandson, "but we can ensure the next generation knows their duty. Clara's story will guide them Through the foundation, Clara Reeves' story became a case study for law enforcement agencies nationwide. Investigators learned that collaboration between families and authorities was essential. Advances in technology, like DNA and digital reconstruction, could uncover truths long thought impossible. Moral responsibility was as critical as evidence in solving long unsolved cases. Clara's name became a symbol. Justice is timeless, courage is essential, and truth will always find its way to the light. As Detective Morales looked over Miller's Creek from a quiet hill outside town, she reflected on the journey. We began this investigation chasing fragments of a story, and we ended up witnessing the power of community, of persistence, of moral courage. Clara Reeves taught us that no matter how long the path, truth and justice can prevail. Lydia Reeves added, "Her life may have been stolen, but her story is now eternal. She inspires action, reflection, and remembrance. That is her legacy, one that will ripple through generations." Clara Reeves' story reminds us all, if you have information about an unresolved case, speak up. If you can support families searching for answers, get involved. Remember, justice can come late, but it never arrives too late for those who persist. Her story has already changed Miller's Creek, Texas, and now it's inspiring action nationwide. Share her story. Honor her life. Support truth and justice in your own communities. The story of Clara Reeves no longer belonged only to Miller's Creek. It had become a catalyst for national reflection, an example of how decades-old crimes, once thought unsolvable, could be uncovered through persistence, science, and community accountability. By 2026, the Clara Reeves Foundation had grown into a hub for families, law enforcement, and advocacy groups. What started as a memorial to a single young woman had become a movement aimed at uncovering long-forgotten truths and preventing future tragedies. Once the story gained traction in the media, investigative journalists, podcasters, and documentary filmmakers turned their attention to the overlooked stories of rural America. Communities with similar histories began to re-examine unsolved disappearances from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Law enforcement agencies across the country implemented new programs. Cold case task forces received increased funding. Forensic genealogy became a standard tool in investigations. Partnerships between families and police were encouraged to expedite the reopening of long-dormant cases. Morales, now a recognized figure in the field of cold case investigation, noted, "Clara Reeves' case proves that even after decades, the truth can be revealed. It also reminds us that the system must evolve to give victims' stories a chance to be heard, regardless of how much time has passed." Back in Texas, Miller's Creek itself underwent a quiet but profound transformation. Residents, previously wary of discussing the past, began implementing policies to promote transparency and accountability. Mandatory reporting workshops for teachers, clergy, and community leaders. Ethics programs in schools, teaching young people the importance of moral courage. Town meetings focus on historical reflection, acknowledging past failures, and making promises for vigilance in the future. Even decades-old relationships were reevaluated. Friendships and family ties were tested, but the overarching sentiment was clear. Truth could no longer be ignored, and ethical responsibility had to be embraced by everyone, not just law enforcement. Experts in criminal psychology and sociology cited Clara Reeves' case as a critical study in the dynamics of secrecy, fear, and moral inertia. Communities often protect wrongdoers out of fear, loyalty, or denial. Silence can amplify crimes, allowing perpetrators to act with impunity. Restoring justice is not just about punishment. It is also about healing for families and communities. In seminars and conferences, Morales spoke about the burden of historical silence. Time may obscure evidence, but also preserves memory in unexpected ways. Witnesses, letters, and even old photographs can become crucial. And when communities face the truth collectively, healing is possible. The attention Clara Reeves' story drew inspired discussions on legislative reform in the United States. Funding for cold case investigations. States allocated grants to local police departments to reopen unresolved cases. Statutes of limitations revisions. Some crimes, particularly murder and unlawful burial, now have no statute of limitations, even decades later. Enhanced witness protection and reporting mechanisms. designed to encourage individuals to come forward without fear of retaliation. Lydia Reeves testified at several hearings, advocating for these reforms. Her testimony emphasized that truth and accountability must transcend fear and tradition. Clara's life was taken, and her story was silenced. But no family should have to wait nearly 8 decades to know what happened. Policies that protect whistleblowers and fund investigations are essential. Justice delayed should never be justice denied. Schools across Texas, and eventually across the country, began to use Clara's story in curricula focused on history, ethics, and civic responsibility. Lessons included forensic science techniques, DNA analysis, fingerprint identification, and modern investigative methods. Community ethics, the importance of vigilance, speaking out, and preventing injustice. Historical awareness, understanding how societal norms of past decades can enable crimes to go unchecked. Students wrote essays, held debates, and even created art projects inspired by Clara's story. The educational impact ensured that future generations would carry her story forward, transforming tragedy into a tool for moral and civic instruction. Across the country, families with missing loved ones were inspired by the Reeves' persistence. Letters poured into the foundation describing parents who had never stopped searching for their children, siblings determined to piece together decades-old clues, communities that finally faced uncomfortable truths about their own histories. The foundation responded by creating support networks, offering guidance, and funding the use of advanced forensic tools. Clara's story had become a beacon for hope, showing that justice is achievable, even when it seems impossibly delayed. Morales became a sought-after consultant, helping other jurisdictions apply lessons learned from Miller's Creek. She emphasized, every piece of evidence matters, no matter how old. Every witness counts, even if decades have passed. And every community has a responsibility to seek truth. Clara Reeves reminded us that persistence and courage are timeless. Her work also inspired a new generation of forensic investigators, eager to solve the cold cases of the past while preventing injustices in the future. Clara Reeves' story is more than a narrative of crime and punishment. It offers profound lessons. Silence has consequences. Choosing not to act can enable wrongdoing. Justice is timeless. Even decades later, truth can be uncovered. Community responsibility matters. Ethical courage is essential for societal well-being. Persistence is powerful. Families, investigators, and advocates can make a difference regardless of how long the case has been cold. These lessons were integrated into town programs, national awareness campaigns, and educational initiatives, ensuring that Clara's story will continue to shape moral consciousness for generations to come. By 2027, Clara Reeves' story had achieved lasting recognition. A national podcast series chronicled the investigation. Documentaries highlighted the intersection of forensic science, ethics, and community responsibility. Scholarships and foundation programs trained students in criminal justice, forensics, and ethical leadership. Annual memorial events in Miller's Creek drew visitors from across Texas and neighboring states. Clara, though silenced in life, had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and justice. Her story reminded everyone that no victim should be forgotten, and no crime is too old to seek the truth. As her story spread beyond Texas, viewers and listeners were urged to support organizations dedicated to solving cold cases, encourage communities to speak out against wrongdoing, even in small or uncomfortable circumstances, recognize the importance of ethical courage and accountability in daily life. Share Clara Reeves' story to ensure that the lessons of her life and death reach as many people as possible. Her life was brief, but her impact is enduring, Morales said. We must carry her story forward, because justice is a gift we can give, not just to the past, but to the future. By the late 2020s, Clara Reeves' story had transcended the boundaries of Miller's Creek. What began as a local tragedy had become a nationwide movement, inspiring families, investigators, and communities to take action in ways they never thought possible. Her story was no longer just about a crime committed in 1957. It was about resilience, courage, and the power of moral responsibility. Across the United States, families of missing persons drew strength from the Reeves' determination. Letters poured into the Clara Reeves Foundation from people who had lost loved ones decades ago, some never expecting resolution. One letter, from a woman in rural Kentucky, recounted her brother's disappearance in 1962. We gave up hope long ago. Reading about Clara gave us courage. If she could be found after 60 years, maybe my brother can too. Maybe we aren't powerless after all. The foundation offered guidance on reopening cases, connecting families to forensic genealogists, legal advisors, and investigative teams. In many instances, Clara's story directly led to reopening of cold cases, giving families their first glimmer of closure. In one remarkable case, a pair of sisters discovered that their long-lost cousin had been buried in a remote area, a discovery facilitated by the Foundation's guidance on analyzing historical records. They credited Clara's story for giving them the courage and perseverance to act. For law enforcement, the case became a blueprint for solving long-forgotten mysteries. Cold case units began to integrate the lessons learned from Miller's Creek, re-examining old evidence with new technology. DNA testing, digital reconstruction, and AI analysis became standard practices. Engaging with families, investigators learned to view relatives not as obstacles, but as partners in discovery. Persistence beyond bureaucracy. Detectives realized that cases could be solved despite delays, limitations, or initial inaction. Morales herself traveled across the country, consulting with departments and speaking at conferences. She emphasized the ethical dimension of investigation. We can have all the technology in the world, but without the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, cases remain unsolved. Clara's story teaches us that moral courage is just as vital as forensic skill. Several high-profile cold cases, previously considered hopeless, were eventually solved using methods inspired by Clara's investigation, including families tracking distant relatives through DNA, uncovering old correspondence, and re-examining overlooked testimonies. Meanwhile, Miller's Creek continued its slow but profound transformation. The town, once known primarily for its quiet rural life, became a model for ethical vigilance and historical awareness. Annual events honoring Clara Reeves drew visitors from across the country. Town leaders initiated programs including historical review boards that examined old town records to ensure transparency, youth mentorship programs emphasizing ethics, civic duty, and community responsibility, public forums encouraging residents to discuss uncomfortable aspects of the past openly. Even longtime residents who had once avoided the topic began to engage. Their conversations were no longer hushed, but reflective and instructive, aimed at preventing similar tragedies in the future. "It's amazing what one story can do," said Marjorie Lane, a lifelong resident. "We've learned that ignoring the past doesn't erase it. Confronting it, even painfully, makes us stronger." In yet another surprising turn, archivists working with the Foundation discovered a small trove of hidden municipal documents dating back to the 1950s. These records included police reports, school attendance logs, and informal town council notes that shed new light on the community's role in the decades-long silence surrounding Clara's disappearance. One particularly revealing set of notes described a pattern of fear and social pressure, showing that many residents felt constrained by neighbors' influence, reputations, and unspoken threats. Morales commented, "These documents don't change what happened, but they explain why it was possible. They offer a lesson about human behavior, about the importance of courage in the face of social pressure, and they reinforce why Clara's story matters so much today." Clara Reeves' case became a focal point in academic research, especially in the fields of sociology, criminal justice, and psychology. Scholars examined the intersection of rural culture, secrecy, and moral responsibility, publishing papers, and holding conferences to discuss the broader implications. Sociologists explored how community cohesion can inadvertently shield wrongdoing. Psychologists studied the long-term effects of silence and moral suppression. Criminal justice experts developed new protocols for cold case investigations informed by historical context. Universities offer courses using Clara's case as a central study, teaching students to approach investigations with rigor, empathy, and ethical awareness. The Foundation also documented individual stories of transformation inspired by Clara. One example involved a former schoolteacher who, after reading about Clara, realized she had withheld critical information in the 1960s. Though decades late, she came forward to assist in reopening a different cold case, ultimately helping to bring closure to a family long haunted by mystery. Another story involved a young criminology student who, motivated by Clara's story, dedicated her thesis to analyzing long-term investigative failures in rural communities. Her research contributed directly to reform in local law enforcement practices, ensuring better accountability for future generations. By 2030, Clara Reeves' story had transcended the boundaries of a single town. It became a symbol for delayed justice, moral courage, and community accountability. The foundation had helped reopen dozens of cold cases. Educational programs based on her story reached thousands of students nationwide. Annual conferences attracted law enforcement, families, and advocates from across the country. The town of Millers Creek was celebrated as a model for confronting historical injustice and transforming trauma into education and action. Clara's life may have been brief, but her influence is enduring, Morales remarked. Her story teaches us that courage is timeless, justice is possible, and communities can change for the better. Clara Reeves' story carries lessons for every viewer. Never ignore injustice, even when it seems small or distant. Support families and organizations seeking answers in long-forgotten cases. Teach future generations the importance of courage, morality, and accountability. Share stories like Clara's, ensuring that truth, justice, and memory are preserved. She may have lived in the 1950s, but her story is alive today, Morales emphasized. And it reminds us all the fight for justice, the courage to speak up, and the responsibility to act are not bound by time. Clara Reeves, once silenced, now speaks through her legacy, inspiring action, reform, and hope in every community that hears her story. The story of Clara Reeves had reached its final chapter, but its impact was far from over. Across Millers Creek, Texas, and the nation at large, the young woman whose life had been stolen in 1957 had become an enduring symbol of justice, courage, and moral responsibility. The trial was long concluded. Cold cases inspired by her investigation were actively being solved, and her foundation was flourishing. Yet the true resolution of Clara's story extended beyond courtroom verdicts and media attention. It lived in the hearts of families, investigators, and communities transformed by her life and tragic death. Millers Creek had undergone a transformation that no one could have anticipated in 1957. Once a quiet, insular town, it now engaged in open reflection and accountability, driven by the lessons of Clara's story. Town leaders implemented programs to support victims' families and educate young people on civic responsibility. Local churches hosted annual memorial services to honor Clara, ensuring that her memory remained visible and respected. Schools integrated ethics workshops, history lessons, and investigative simulations, giving students hands-on experiences in moral reasoning and critical thinking. Residents who had once avoided discussing Clara's disappearance now spoke openly, sharing stories of fear, regret, and lessons learned. "It was painful to confront the past," said Marjorie Lane, a lifelong resident. "But through reflection, we become stronger. We've learned that silence can be dangerous and courage is contagious." Clara Reeves' story also gained national recognition. Documentaries, podcasts, and books chronicled the investigation, emphasizing the intersection of forensic science, community accountability, and moral courage. Law enforcement agencies cited the case in training programs, emphasizing persistence and ethical vigilance. Families across the United States drew inspiration, reopening cold cases and pursuing justice for loved ones long lost. Universities offer courses exploring the social and psychological dynamics revealed by the case, ensuring that Clara's story informed future generations of criminal justice professionals. Through these efforts, Clara's life, though tragically short, had left an enduring impact far beyond her hometown. The Clara Reeves Foundation had become a model for advocacy, investigation, and education. Its mission extended to supporting families in unresolved cases, providing guidance, funding, and emotional support, promoting forensic and investigative research, helping solve cold cases nationwide, raising public awareness, emphasizing the importance of community vigilance, ethical responsibility, and moral courage. Lydia Reeves, now the Foundation's director, reflected, "Clara's story is not just about loss. It's about hope, action, and the power of truth. Every case we help reopen, every family we support, carries forward her legacy. Justice may have been delayed, but it is never denied." The Foundation continued to grow, partnering with law enforcement, academic institutions, and community organizations to ensure that Clara's story remained a guiding light for decades to come. Across the country, individuals shared how Clara's story had changed their lives. A young criminology student pursued a career in cold case investigation, inspired by the success of Morales' methods. A retired teacher finally came forward with information that helped solve a case from the 1960s. Families reunited or found closure after decades of uncertainty, giving them a renewed sense of peace. These stories underscored the far-reaching influence of Clara Reeves, a young woman whose life had been tragically cut short, but whose legacy continued to drive justice and inspire courage. Clara Reeves' story offered timeless moral lessons. Silence can enable wrongdoing. Even decades later, the consequences of inaction remain. Justice knows no expiration date. Delayed justice is still justice. Communities have responsibility. Ethical courage and accountability are essential for a healthy society. Persistence and vigilance are powerful tools. Investigators, families, and advocates can change the course of history through dedication and determination. These lessons were incorporated into educational curricula, town programs, and public awareness campaigns, ensuring that future generations would carry Clara's story forward. In Miller's Creek, the emotional arc finally reached a point of closure. Families, neighbors, and friends held an annual memorial garden ceremony, planting flowers and trees in Clara's honor. The mural depicting her life, her smile, her pickup truck, the open fields of her hometown, remained a visible reminder of her enduring presence. Residents reflected on the past with honesty and humility, acknowledging mistakes while committing to a more vigilant and ethical future. Clara's story forced us to confront uncomfortable truths, said the town's mayor. And in doing so, it transformed our community. We will never forget her, and we will carry her lessons forward. Detective Morales, whose persistence had been central to solving the cold case, reflected on the lasting impact. Every piece of evidence mattered, every witness mattered, and every decision mattered. Clara's story reminds us that truth has a way of surfacing, even after decades. And when it does, it has the power to heal, to educate, and to inspire. Her words echoed across training programs, conferences, and media interviews, inspiring new generations of investigators and reinforcing the moral weight of pursuing justice. Clara Reeves' life and death ultimately became a symbol of justice delayed but not denied. Her story inspired law enforcement reforms and improved investigative techniques, educated communities about ethical responsibility and moral courage, offer hope and closure to families with unresolved cases, transform Miller's Creek from a town burdened by fear into a community committed to transparency and accountability. Her legacy was no longer limited to memory. It was living action. Each cold case solved, each family reunited, each community educated was a continuation of Clara's story. To honor Clara Reeves and all victims like her, share her story to raise awareness and inspire action. Support cold case foundations and forensic research initiatives. Encourage communities to confront silence and fear with courage and accountability. Teach future generations the importance of moral courage, persistence, and truth. Clara Reeves may have lived in the 1950s, Lydia Reeves said, but her story is alive today, in every investigation reopened, in every life transformed, and in every community choosing courage over silence. Her legacy reminds us all that justice, no matter how long delayed, will ultimately prevail.